So where we discussed about like the basic features of the of the data warehouse, which is subject oriented, integrated, time variant, non-volatile. Along with these four, it's historic data we do preserve, and sixth one is like what? Along with historic data, what we do have the summarized data. So these six are like the peculiar features of the data warehouse architecture. Then we discussed about the comparison between the operational system and the information system in detail. Then we covered with like the data warehouse architecture, where we have like the multi-tier architecture of the data warehouse, which we have discussed. After the ETL process, after the pre-processing step, after the ETL process, what we have, the bottom tier of like the data warehouse servers is there. Then as per the application's requirement, we may have like the middle tier to enhance the performance of the system in terms of like the OLAP layer we do have, in terms of the OLAP layer. So in that way, the multi-tier architecture of the data warehouse comprises of the three tiers. One is the data warehouse server tier itself, then the middle tier is of the OLAP server, and then the third tier is the top tier is of like the front end tools. So as I explained with example in the last session, how it works basically. So this architecture we have discussed in detail. Then we discussed about like how the tables are preserved in the data warehouse, how the tables are preserved in the data warehouse. So that we discussed basically. So in that way, in the data warehouse, the tables are preserved in terms of like the what are the subjects are identified by the application modeler, the data modeler. So those subjects are basically preserved as like the in the fact table actually. Okay, so in terms of like the fact table, and the attributes, the detailed attributes of the dimensions are stored in the dimension table. So the detailed attributes, the what we can say, the generalized attributes are preserved in the dimension tables. And then these are like the attributes which are we called as like a derived attributes or like the summarized attributes, or they are also called as like the they are also called as the measures. So they are also there. So on the basis of these measures or like from the derived attributes, we do the actual analysis basically. So in that way, we discussed about like in the data warehouse architecture, the format of the tables is different, and in that way like the it gets stored in terms of like the fact table and the dimension tables. Then we discussed about like what is the role of like the data mart. Okay, so that also we discussed. So data mart are nothing but like a smaller units of the data warehouse. So where for the big enterprise, what we can have, we can divide the scope of the enterprise into the smaller chunks in terms of like the data marts. So data marts are like the local entities, as well like the data warehouse is a global entity we can say. So in that way, so again this improves the performance of the system basically. So in that way we discussed about like what is data mart concept, that also we discussed. Then we discussed about like the generic architecture of data. So now already we discussed this. Then in last session we discussed about like the free open source tools for data integration. So where all these are like the free open source tools for data integration for pre-processing. That is like the pre-processing is also called as like the extract, transform and load operation. It is also called as extract, transform and load operation. So in that way ETL process, it is the ETL process. So in that way these are like the tools, these are the free open source tool, like the Pentaho is there, Scriptella is there, Jaspersoft is there, Apache Kafka is there. So in that way there are many more other tools are also available. So in that way these are not free, These are like the free and the licensed softwares also, but these are the top 7 ETL tools. So like Informatica is the licensed tool basically. Oracle Data Integrator is a licensed tool. Tableau, we do have the academic version of the Tableau. So in that way, the Tableau preparator for the commercial purpose, it is licensed software. AWS again, the commercial purpose, it is the license software. So in that way, these are like the top 7 ETL tools, pre-processing tools for the year 2020 basically. So this we discussed. Then we discussed about like the data warehouse tools. So in that way, pre-processing tools are separately available. Data warehouse tools are separately available. In that way, the Microsoft Azure, so you all know basically this is a cloud environment, but in the cloud basically they have like for the data warehouse they have provided the support. So in that way Microsoft Azure support the data warehouse. So in that way like we do have like the we can create the data warehouse, then Amazon, then the Google BigQuery, Snowflake, Teradata. So these all these are basically what, not all are the free open source, okay, but the as like this all these things are used commercially in the industry. So in that way these are the for the commercial purpose the license softwares are used basically. So in that way these are like the data warehouse tools. So what the activity we are planning basically, so uh, project wise, project group wise, you are expected to choose any of the tool. You are expected to choose any of the tool, and you are expected to prepare only 3 slides PPT. You are expected to prepare only 3 slides PPT, in which what you have to mention basically what that tool is basically, what the functionality is of that tool, and what are the features of that tool, and what are the
Can't hear, ma'am.
Hello, am I audible? So in a way, we were discussing about the ETL tools and the data warehouse tools. Okay. So in that way, what is expected basically? Now you are expected to have in the project groups. Okay. You are expected to prepare one small 3 slides presentation. Okay. Now for the next 10 minutes, like I will not share with you the screen because of some problem, but like we will continue with the session. Okay. So in a way, what basically we do have presentation. So one in one slide, what that tool is basically, what the features are basically, and in that way, so that will be the first slide. Then in the second slide, what we may have, basically we will go with, so with some application example, if you can explore the functionalities of the tool. So for that, I will first in upcoming session, first I will show you basically one tool for ETL and one tool for the data warehouse, and on that basis you may go with basically for preparing the presentation. But in that way I want the active participation. But before that I will show you one ETL tool, I will demonstrate. Then for data warehouse also I will demonstrate, and on the basis of that then you may go with like the other tools basically. Okay, so that like the activity based learning we will have for the data warehouse and the ETL processing. Okay, so that is expected. So you decide on like which topic to have basically, and then in that way we will go. So yes, so what we were discussing about the data warehouse. So in that way, how the data is preserved in the data warehouse. Hello, dear students. Now, yes, yes. Now, am I audible now? Yes. Okay. So, as discussed, like the demonstration first of one tool each I will give, and on that basis, on a similar line, you may explore either the detailing of the same tool, or you may select the separate tool also. So, in a way we will work. Then I was discussing about like how in the data warehouse basically the data is stored. So for that also again the life cycle is there basically for the modeling of the data. Okay, so where actually just like in database management system we have like the ER diagrams. Okay, just like the ER diagrams in the database management system, here also we do draw the diagrams where the designing is done basically, where so those diagrams are called as like the design level diagrams, DFDs. So in that way we are expected to, so that again the theoretical part we will cover later on, but in that way the subjects are identified basically. Based on the subject then we go with the designing of the attributes finalization. We do attributes finalization. After the attribute finalization we do select from the existing tables whichever the attributes are required, and then on that basis we go with like, and we do select like the which attributes are required for the analysis purpose. So that also we do decide, and on that basis the whole system is designed basically. So in that way the data, so here we are not revolving around the functionalities, here we are revolving around the data. Okay, so we do have at a center the data basically, and then like accordingly the life cycle is also basically, it is also a different life cycle we do use. Then again to explore with basically what we have in the data warehouse. The difference between is like the, we are preserving the data into the fact table, in the dimension tables. But again for those fact tables, so we were discussing about like if the data is very huge, then again, so as I discussed in the last lectures, so if the data is of like the 100 years, then we do store the table as like what? Now as we have seen, the sales table is there. Okay, for the sales table, then the fact table itself is preserved as like what? Sales. For like sales underscore 2010 to 2020. So for every 10 years basically. So in that way, like the organized, the data organization is very much important while preserving the data basically. As like, as once we are preserving the data, we are expected to maintain it, and as per the requirement we do extract it basically. Okay, so in that way the next point is of like what the server side architecture. So as like we are discussing about the bottom layer, as we are discussing about the bottom layer of the data warehouse. So there basically, so we just what we have discussed till now, all are the logical entities basically, all are the logical entities. But in a way, now the data which we are preserving, we are expected to preserve it as being like in on the servers ultimately. Okay, so in that way, as per the application's requirement, the hardware also plays utmost important role basically. So in that way, you might have studied in the organization, computer organization, okay, the various architectures which are required or which are available. So in that way, so what we do have like the single processor system that already we do use basically. Then what we do have basically the network system. But beyond that, like what we do have basically the massively parallel architecture is used basically. Massively parallel architecture is used. PPT open केली का? नहीं ठीक है, इथून open करो. So massively parallel architecture also may be used basically, or the symmetric processors also are also there. So for high performance computing, so you are studying the high performance computing subject also. So in high performance computing, it is required. In high performance computing, it is required basically. So now I will share with you the screen where करते नहीं. दिया है तो खोल लो. So just a minute. So I am sharing with you the screen where you can see the various architectures. So in that way, the various architectures. Oh. So finally that. Because so in that way, we do have the single processor system. Then we do have like the symmetric multiprocessor system, and we do have like the massively parallel processor system. So now I will share with you the screen. So where already I discussed basically the whatever the data center environment is there. So that is used for preserving the data. So where the superscalar architectures also plays the important role. And as we know, now the technology is advancing and the various advanced features are also available. So in that way, so all types of architectures actually are used as per the requirement. So is it visible? to the students? Yes. Sorry for the disturbance. Yes. So it's now visible. So in a way, so what we discussed, which are the various server options? So there, the single processor. So for a very small application, like if you are providing the data analytics application for a small grocers, basically for the small vendors, then there they don't require the higher end servers basically. So in that way, or like as being the solution provider, you may also use your normal desktop as a server, as like you don't have the huge requirement, but wherever the huge requirement is there, there in the data centers basically they use most popularly these two kind of the hardware structures. So one is symmetric multiprocessor and another one is पुढच्या lecture साठी बघा चालतं. So one is symmetric multiprocessor and another one is massively parallel processor. So in that way, here if you observe basically what is symmetric multiprocessor. So what we do have, the multiple processors are there where basically, and what they are sharing the common memory. They are sharing the common memory basically. So in that way, so the processors, so the processors are having the processing power, but to get the data, to get the instructions, they are fetching them from the common memory basically. So in that way, that is called as like the symmetric multiprocessing. Okay, as like the symmetric processors are there, but the memory is commonly used. Then the other option is like the massively parallel processors. So in the massively parallel processors, what we can observe basically, the there are the servers basically, those who are having the local RAM, local memory is there, and the local storage is also there, and they are connected with the high speed network. They are connected with the high speed network. So in a way, we do have these kind of the servers, so which are required for like setting up the data centers. So the data center architectures are hired basically by the service providers, and there the whatever the tools we have discussed just now for the data warehouse, like the Microsoft Azure. This is like the cloud solution itself. So in that way, the Google BigQuery. So these logical environments. So these are called as like what? These tools are called as the logical environment. So these tools are installed. These tools are installed on these kind of the high-end servers basically. These kind of the high-end servers. And in that way, like, because what we do want, we want the data to be protected, okay, and where the backup mechanism also always should be there basically. So in that way, the stronger hardware support is required for all the data mining applications where we are using the data warehouse basically, okay, and where the data warehouse, while setting up the data warehouse, the server configurations plays the major role. So for the smaller application, we may use the dedicated single server also, but for like the higher enterprise level applications where the need of the data warehouse is huge and the high availability is also expected. So there we can use the symmetric multiprocessor architecture or like the massively parallel processor architecture. So what is the difference between the symmetric multiprocessor architecture and massively parallel processor architecture? So the difference is basically here the processor are networked and they don't have the local memory, and then they don't have the local storage also. So they are sharing the global memory and the global storage. So in the high performance computing, definitely you are learning all these aspects of like when we are sharing the resources, how basically the things are handled. how basically the things are handled. So this is basically what the server configurations are which are required for the data warehouse. So now, so we are discussing about again the bottom layer of the architecture, that is like the data warehouse. So where when we are creating the structure for the fact tables and the dimension tables, so there the various schemas are used. Various schemas are used. So what I stated basically just like the ER diagram. Just like the ER diagram. What we have, the designing is done basically. So for that, the schemas are designed. So in that way, there are actually for designing the fact tables and the dimensions tables, we do have in our curriculum three different schemas. One is star schema, another one is snowflake schema, and another one is like the galaxy schema. So in that way, in our curriculum, we are going to discuss three schemas, three different logical schemas, by means of which the fact tables and dimension tables are connected with each other or like are correlated with each other. So those three schemas are star schema, snowflake schema, and the galaxy schema. So in that way, in the next session, we will focus more upon these three schemas. And for these three schemas, we will explore with the design aspect, how these schemas are designed, and they're like we are expected to cover the multiple case studies, and even in the examinations. In the examinations, the various case studies are asked basically, and for those case studies, like we are expected to draw the schemas using the star, snowflakes, or like the galaxy. So in a way, and nowadays like as like the research is going on in this field, so many more other schemas are also available. So in a way, so the data mining application, while designing the data mining application, the data modeling when it is done, so there when the fact tables and the dimension tables are designed, so the fact tables and dimension tables are designed using these logical schemas. So this we will explore these schemas, what they are, what the importance they have, that we will discuss in the next session. And if possible, we will explore one tool for like the data warehouse also. Okay, so with this now I will conclude my session, and in the next session we will continue with the various schemas which are used for like the designing the tables for preserving the data in the data warehouse. So with this now I will conclude my session. Thank you all.